We are very excited to be co-sponsoring with the Press Club of Dallas this evening's event. And we would like to extend all of our thanks to all of our panel members for what I'm sure will be a fantastic program. To get the program started, let me introduce the moderator of tonight's event, Niki McCuistion. Niki is the executive producer, and co-founder of the award-winning McCuistion television program, now in its 24th year as an independent production on KERA Dallas and syndicated on PBS in several cities around the country. She is a filmmaker of some documentaries on terrorism and what led to the tragic events of 9/11, called The Roots of War, The Road to Peace. Her work has taken her to a number of places around the world where trouble is brewing, from Iraq to Syria. She's the author and co-author of several books, including a newly released title, Women, Wealth, and Giving, The Virtuous Legacy of the Boom Generation, and the soon-to-be released book, Show Me the Unrestricted Money, a how-to fundraising manual for nonprofits. Niki has an MA in Philanthropy and Development from St. Mary's University, but not the one in Texas, the one in Winona, Minnesota, and an MBA in Leadership and Governance from the University of Dallas. She's also finalizing her Certified Fundraising Executive application for Association of Fundraising Professionals. Niki is here tonight because she's the president-elect of the Press Club of Dallas, and she came to us with the idea of co-hosting a program between the Dallas Bar and the Press Club, and we think it's a fantastic idea. She is deeply committed, personally and professionally, to the accountability and freedom of the press. With that, let's get the program started. Niki?
Just a couple of quick things. I've gotten a couple of texts, and great excuse. Apparently some folks can't get here on time because there's something called a presidential motorcade. Can you imagine? But it happens, right? And another quick housekeeping thing is that we are videotaping, so hopefully everyone has signed in outside giving us your release. And if not, the fact that you are in this room is giving us permission to videotape. And if there's anyone who is in the witness protection program and don't wish to be videotaped, would you please raise your hand? We're okay? We're good? So let's take a look at an issue which is becoming ever more important. And for just a moment, I'd like to go back in time, and some of you may not remember those days, but I grew up in New York City a long, long time ago. This is not a fairy tale, this is all truth. There are a couple of baby boomers here, I see. And I can remember back in the days, we used to read the newspaper. Any of you remember Dick Tracy? You're giving away your age. But I loved Dick Tracy because he always got his man. And then once I got past Dick Tracy, I went on to Brenda Starr, girl reporter. Any of you remember Brenda Starr? See a couple of heads nodding. Well, Brenda Starr, if you recall, had these flashing green eyes, was tall, was slender, had this beautiful red hair, and she not only got her man, she also got the news. And it was about accuracy. But I can remember how very important that newspaper was and how I cherished and sometimes would keep it for days and cut things out and, you know, school projects and whatever it might be. And here we are, if we fast forward to today, many, many, many years later, and the average person in the United States does not read a newspaper. As a matter of fact, many get their news from CNN and Fox commentaries and from Facebook. And so we might have information, but folks, are we truly aware of what's going on in the world? And then what happens, of course, with the economic situation the way it is in dwindling newsrooms, and the fact that the Fourth Estate is in peril, I truly do believe, and the Fifth Estate is giving it a run for its money. I think we have a lot to talk about in terms of ethics, responsibility, and accountability. Because as a little girl, I was brought up, believe it or not, to believe everything I read in the newspaper, took it as gospel. And having learned from the best, Brenda and Dick Tracy, I still have to go, surely that should be what it is, but it's not, is it? And so in taking a look at what freedom of the press is all about, we've assembled some really strong voices up here. I wish we had you for another 2 hours because we could find plenty to talk about and question. And so what I hope will happen is that their strong voices are going to give their perspective on the various issues that I've brought up from, again, their perspective. And at the very end, we'll be opening it up to your questions. And the garage, we have to be out of here by 8 o'clock, otherwise we sleep here. So even if we do go over a little bit because of the timing and the motorcade, et cetera, that'll be just fine. So a couple of things to consider, because there are several questions that I'd like to pose to you, have them in the back of your mind, and our speakers will be addressing some of these issues. As I'd mentioned, the declining business model and how it's affecting and impacting today's journals and others. Is there a question about how journalism should be fulfilling its role? Is that role changing so dramatically that it can hardly be identified? And what are cable channels doing in terms of their featuring commentaries rather than really reporting the news is something that we're going to be taking a look at. Media, which used to be, perhaps still is, or is that eroding, the watchdog of government? What kind of slippery slope are we on there? And how about policy making? What is going on in terms of the media adequately covering policy making in our nation's capital rather than making policy themselves? Our first presenter is someone many of you know. She has been around in terms of speaking to the public and helping us form views for many a year. Carolyn Barta is the professor of practice at the Journalism Division for Southern Methodist University. She was a distinguished journalist for the Dallas Morning News for almost 40 years. So you remember Brenda Starr.
You're right.
Indeed, all right. Ms. Barta's graduate work in public affairs reporting at the University of Texas prepared her for a career writing about politics, government, and public policy. She began general assignments reporter at the News in 1965, covered City Hall for 5 years, became a political writer in 1972, and she covered local and state politics and later national politics, including several presidential elections. And she's held various positions at the News, from editorial department, editorial writer, political column reporter, correspondent, editor of special projects. In fact, the editor of a 1983 award-winning section on the President Kennedy assassination. She is the 2011 winner of the Meadows Foundation Distinguished Teaching Professorship, given annually to one faculty member in the Meadows School of the Arts, and a Rotunda Outstanding Professor in 2010. And the list of awards goes on and on because she has earned her stars and stripes, so to speak. And she will be our first presenter, has a master's degree from the University of Texas at Austin and a Bachelor of Arts from Texas Tech University in Lubbock. What I'm going to do is introduce all of the panelists, and then Carolyn will be taking first place in pulling all of this together. Next to Carolyn is Shawn P. Williams. And Shawn has been the manager of media relations and community affairs for the Dallas Police Department since June of this year. He has a very colorful background that you're going to enjoy hearing about. He'd spent a year as deputy chief of staff for the Dallas Mayor Mike Rawlings, served as project manager for Mayor Rawlings' Grow South Initiative and Men Against Abuse rally. He also launched DallasSouthBlog.com, which is now ShawnPWilliams.com, in 2006, and Dallas South News in 2009, which is a nonprofit news organization which utilizes technology, social media, journalistic principles to empower and inform underserved communities. He's a former columnist for the Dallas Morning News and has appeared monthly as a guest commentator on Channel 8's WFAA, Inside Texas Politics. Again, many awards, including in 2010, a Texas Social Media Award from the Austin American Statesman. He's published his first book, Blogging while black in 2011. He joined the Poynter Institute of Media Studies National Advisory Board that same year. And Shawn is an Aggie. Welcome. He's also a member of the Fourth and the Fifth Estate. So we're going to have some fun with that one, I hope. All right. Our next presenter to my immediate left is Chip Babcock, former journalist. He worked as a sports writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Miami Herald, and he says that somehow his career ran off the tracks when he quit writing to attend law school, of all things. Go figure. But he also says he recovered. He joined Jackson Walker and started to present journalists and others who sought to exercise their First Amendment rights. He argued a case in the Fifth Circuit that established the constitutional right of journalists to protect their confidential sources. By the way, with the espionage and what's going on with that, that again is a slippery slope that we need to be very aware of and get involved in. He's tried 16 media cases to a verdict, winning 14, but those 2 losses were reversed on appeal. One of those wins came up in Amarillo when Oprah Winfrey was sued by a group of cattle feeders. At the end of the trial, Oprah said, with her arm around Chip, "Free speech not only lives, it rocks." You've had some fun. And our last presenter, Dr. Rita Kirk. Rita is the director of the McGuire Center for Ethics and Public Responsibility, an Altshuler Distinguished Professor, and a Meadows Distinguished Teaching Professor at Southern Methodist University. She teaches courses in ethics, political communication, free speech and First Amendment, history and the philosophy of free speech, and lots of communication research. Again, another very distinguished professor who's earned and been awarded the prestigious M Award, as well as the Rotunda Outstanding Faculty Teaching Award by vote of the SMU student body. She was named in 2010 a Texas Woman Pioneer by the Veteran Feminist of America for work done to advance women in the field of communication. Thank you, Rita. Dr. Kirk holds a bachelor's degree in communication political science, a master's degree in communications, and both are from the University of Arkansas. She received her PhD in communication from the University of Missouri. Numerous books, including Political Empiricism, Communication Strategies in State and Regional Elections, and a book titled Hate Speech, which she's a participant and co-edited, which was awarded the Outstanding Book on the Subject of Human Rights in North America and the James Madison Prize for Work on Free Speech. Something interesting that I think affects all of us is that since 2007, Dr. Kirk and Dan Schill have served as dial test analyst for CNN, covering debates and candidate speeches and the President's annual State of the Union address. And by the way, CNN in 2008 received the esteemed Peabody Award for their unparalleled coverage of a historic election process, in no small part due to the work of Dr. Kirk and Dan Schill. Please give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you. And so, Carolyn, with your rich history, one of the things that I hope that you're going to be covering, and in our conversation, you were very emphatic about this, and that is that news reporting has changed so much, and we seem to be getting away from that into commentary. Please, talk to us about that.
Well, I wish that I had some answers to give you tonight, but instead I really want to talk about the challenges that the news media faces, and certainly that is one of the challenges that I see. It's the partisan rise of the news media. But I want to start out by talking a little bit about the economics of the news media today, because that affects everything else. the state of the news media, the future of the news, is basically focused on the business model. We've lost our business model, so advertising is no longer supporting the news media. The Star-Telegram, revenues for the newspaper industry have gone down 40% in 5 years. That makes a tremendous impact on your personnel. The Star-Telegram has had repeated cutbacks. They've eliminated 43% of their personnel in the last 5 years. The Morning News has had cutbacks and layoffs, not as bad as the Star-Telegram. And I'll get back to the Morning News later on. There have been cutbacks in the broadcast media as well, network news as well as local news. So what this means is fewer boots on the ground doing the reporting, and that has implications for all of us, whether we are purveyors of the news or whether we're consumers of the news. So why didn't we know about the problems with the website for the Affordable Care Act? Maybe it was because journalists were so focused on the politics of it, but it could have been because we don't have journalists covering agencies and departments like we used to. We're covering the White House and we're covering Congress, maybe we're covering the Pentagon, but we don't have reporters that are embedded in some of these agencies so that they're reporting day in, day out on what's going on. Plus, the news media is under tremendous stress to do more. It was easy back in my day. I just had to go out and report a story or report a column and then write it on deadline, and I was done. Today, you've got a tweet, you've got a blog, you've got a live blog. If you're a print web reporter, you've got to shoot video, you've got to shoot photos. If you are a broadcast reporter, you've got to turn your package into a text story and put it up on the web. So there are a lot more demands on what we would call our traditional media today. Other impacts of technology. Instantaneous news, 24/7 news, means as news is being transmitted on Twitter, in live blogs, on Reddit, some other news sites, it means more errors. There are going to be more errors because it is just put out there more quickly. And that affects the credibility of all of the media. Citizens journalists or non-professionals are operating in this environment who have no training in journalism and the ethical standards of journalism. They're not governed by meeting the standards of their colleagues. A lot of the news that we're seeing online actually is aggregated news. It's picked up from a traditional mainstream news publication, one of the newspapers or a TV, and then it's aggregated onto a blog. That means they're just summarizing somebody else's work. They're not doing any original reporting. Additionally, we're seeing a whole lot more instant feedback. People want to comment on what you're reporting on. It can be very detrimental. A story goes viral, and today it just does. The writer draws negative, hateful comments from people who read anything that they disagree on. I've seen it just this week with a writer at on the daily campus at SMU who wrote an op-ed piece that offended people. And she has been the subject of so many attacks that she had to even take down her Twitter account. So anyway, in the face of the economic problems and the growing online competition, news also is turning more into entertainment. What's hot? What's sexy? What creates buzz? Too much of what we're doing today is passed off at journalism as journalism when it is really trivial, sensational, redundant, and ideological, particularly on cable. A lot of it is designed to create conflict. With the growth of cable and with blogs and social media, everybody has an opinion. So we have punditry masquerading as the news. We have news people on cable interviewing other pundits. I just happened to see Fox around noon today, and the anchor was interviewing a syndicated columnist and a talk show host. So we're interviewing each other. Reporting with an attitude or an edge fits nicely with the needs of cable TVs to fill the 24/7 news hole, and it also fits those who aspire to be celebrity journalists. So we have definitely seen the rise of the partisan media, particularly Fox and MSNBC, where in prime time you get mostly commentators. Even more so-called news shows on cable and even the Sunday morning network shows are really just pundits and partisan analysts arguing back and forth, while fewer journalists, as I said, are actually out reporting the news. So my question is, when we lose the reporting, where are the pundits, the bloggers, and the aggregators going to get their information? We have to protect the baseline, which is the people who are out there finding the news and reporting on the news. Stretching fact has gotten so blatant, in fact, that there's a fact-checking site called PolitiFact. It's Tampa Bay Times fact-checking site, is now offering pundit fact, which means checking political commentators on TV and columnists and bloggers. They've just started, and just this last Sunday, they checked the authenticity, or tried to fact check the authenticity of the various pundits and analysts who were on the 5 morning shows on Sunday morning. So I think it's no accident that trust in the media is on the decline at the same time that the partisan media has gained more influence. The independence and the integrity of the news business has been compromised, and that trust dearly needs to be restored. So this takes us to the growing debate over how journalism should fill its mission. There's actually a debate going on right now. There was a recent publication where Bill Keller, who was a former executive editor of the New York Times, now a columnist for the Times, had a debate with Glenn Greenwald, who is a columnist for The Guardian and was responsible for the publication of Edward Snowden docs. They had a debate over what is the mission today. Greenwald advocates a more activist, partisan kind of journalism. He says it's impossible for reporters to be impartial or objective, so they should just make it clear where they're coming from and then showcase their version of the truth. Bill Keller has a different position, as you might guess. His position is that the need for impartial journalism is greater than it ever has been, largely because we live in an era of affinity-based media, where citizens construct echo chambers of their own beliefs. That basically means they read the news that they agree with. They seek the news that they agree with. People can feel informed without ever encountering information that challenges their prejudices. The headline, by the way, on that debate between Greenwald and Keller was, "Is Glenn Greenwald the future of news?" I hope not, but we're headed in that direction. So I have to mention politics here because of my background in covering politics for so long. I think that the national news media is obsessed with the politics of politics. So instead of getting substance on policy, we're getting coverage and stories on how something impacts politics. Who's losing or winning the fight? How will this affect the next election? Rather than the substance of policy. So think government shutdown, think the Affordable Care Act, and I think you can recall that's the way you see the coverage cast. Who's winning, who's losing, who's it going to impact, who's going to emerge from here as a political leader. So finally, in ticking off the challenges of today's media environment, part of our job as journalists is to hold government and politics accountable, to be the watchdog. It's hard to do that today with what I call so much manipulation of the media, particularly from the White House. We live in an era of the permanent campaign. It's governing by campaigning. And what better illustration do we have than Obama here yesterday talking about the Affordable Care Act and talking about the need for Texas to expand Medicaid to cover health care, more health care insurance for poor people. So he governs by what we call going public. He's taking his message to the public. It's an effort to merge the power of public opinion with the power of persuasion in Washington. Not only do we have a White House that is cast in this permanent campaign mode, but we also have a White House that, and a president who's granting less access than any president since Nixon. He ran on a platform of being transparent, and we have seen very little transparency in this administration. He has targeted exclusive interviews that he sets up with network anchors or whoever he wants to go to, but this is not granting general access. Okay, let me just wrap this up. So I think we're seeing an emphasis on the politics of politics in Washington, not just the White House, but in Congress as well. Technology today provides new and different ways for politicians to reach the public, to target certain voter blocs. This has led to a rapid rise in the number of political consultants, and Rita can jump on this later on. Even as the number of reporters are going down, you're seeing this rapid rise in the number of political consultants who are giving the reporters and the public spin. So the spin, in my opinion, is overtaking the news. Let me just wrap up by going back to the economic situation. We have seen recently people with deep pockets buying some of our newspapers and news outlets. So the founder of Amazon bought the Washington Post. The Red Sox owner has purchased the Boston Globe. A digital company bought Newsweek. A billionaire is now backing Greenwald. These kinds of people, if they have the right standards and values for a journalistic enterprise, may be able to save some of the traditional news products. We'll see. I think we are lucky in Dallas that we have a strong news market here. The morning news, the goal of the Dallas Morning News is to keep its franchise alive by improving the product. The news is charging now more than almost any newspapers except for the Boston Globe and the New York Times. And I heard the publisher speak recently who said, we know if we expect people to buy our product that we have got to provide unique content. We've got to provide unduplicated content. We have got to provide the boots on the ground. So the news is trying to expand its business model by creating and buying other businesses that can make money to pay for the news product. Businesses like a small ad agency, or even a company that would create web ads, print contracting. In fact, it was in the paper this morning that the morning news is going to start printing the Star Telegram at its plant. And it does other print contracting at that plant. The Wall Street Journal, USA Today, New York Times in this region is printed at the morning news plant. So they're trying innovative ways to stay afloat so that they can protect the franchise of the news product, never mind what platform it's presented on, if it's digital or if it's a newspaper. So I think that he knows, the publisher of the morning news knows that everybody has the 5 W's. So what the newspapers that are going to stay alive are going to have to explain the impact of stories, the why of stories. They're going to have to do enterprise journalism. We all know that it's bad for democracy if we don't have a strong press. A democracy can't function without an informed public. It's still up to professional journalists to provide that informed public. So we may have more choices today, more places where we get our information, more ways to communicate. Ironically, that actually could lead to a less informed public.
Carolyn, thank you. You paint a very interesting picture and somewhat of a disturbing picture. Please make note of the questions that you'd like to come back to her and everyone else with, because I think, again, that slippery slope of media's responsibility is to be the watchdog of government and other could be lost if we continue down some of the paths that she brought up, right? Shawn, you've been a member of the 4th Estate as well as the 5th Estate, as I mentioned. So from your perspective, in taking a look at the technology that Carolyn mentioned and that we're bombarded with, and informing as well as news, and there is a difference, how do you see citizen journalism and blogging impacting how news is perceived today?
I guess I'd have to first say that one person's challenges is another person's opportunities. You know, when I started my blog in 2006, I didn't know a blog from a dog or a hog. I didn't even know what I was doing. I went to Google and blogger.com and I had something to say and I wanted to say it. And the main reason I did so was because I looked in the traditional press, the mainstream media. I didn't see people talking who looked like me. Didn't see people who were writing who looked like me. I didn't share the opinions of the people who were producing the news. And this was, you know, before the bottom fell out and before people knew what was even coming. And I think that if the traditional news outlets were living up to their high standards and ideals, people like me would never have had an opportunity to do what I was doing. Yes, I was fortunate, and people like me were fortunate because we were ahead of the curve on technology in 2006. Not only did people in the mainstream media look down at people who were bloggers, but they refused to jump on board with the technology. And the first thing that I think about is last night when I sat down to watch television, and I had my iPad, and I pulled out my iPad and looked at CNN.com. The first lead story was a big picture of a Blockbuster sign, and it said Blockbuster is closing its doors to all of its stores. And it's not that people aren't watching movies. Blockbuster missed out on an opportunity. And I think we let off the last discussion with business, and that's what it really comes down to more than anything, is a business model. And I think many of the challenges that the traditional media faces, and especially specifically newspapers who find themselves in the biggest bit of flux, is based on business and business model and when they decided to go to the web and when they decided to take digital seriously. So that is a part of it, is the technology part. But I think it really does go back to thinking about things like ethics and values. You know, diversity, it took a long time for the media to embrace diversity as a value. And, you can look at any point that someone would call the golden era of journalism, and the voices are not diverse, the writers are not diverse. And once writers became more prevalent, people of color, you still had editors, who were not embracing diversity. And so there was still a void. People were still reading news that they felt comfortable with. People were still going to the New Yorker, and that's not a place that, my mother probably would have gone. My mother would have been reading Ebony. We got Ebony and Jet magazine at our house, right? And so it's still that same set of news that is tailored to the individual. So I don't see anything totally different. When I was introduced to the Poynter Institute in 2009 in St. Petersburg, Florida, I had gotten a letter, and it said, we're going to come and bring a bunch of people together who want to talk about the future of journalism. And this was 2009. I already began these conversations in the future of journalism. And, I was like, a week in St. Petersburg, Florida, free flight, free hotel, sign me up, count me in. And so when I got there were about 26 to 28 people who were there. And we were convened by Kelly McBride. She hosted our week there, and she just released a book called The New Ethics of Journalism, talking about the new ethics of journalism in the 21st century. And basically we called it a sense-making week. In 2009, we got together and talked about what is the future of journalism. And these are questions as a blogger at the time, I never even knew, I never even considered, never even thought about. And we talked about what the future would look like and what the technology would be. And to now look back at the group of people that we had there, and we asked her, how do we all get here? Because I wouldn't have known how, as a blogger for Dallas South News, I would have got there, and they were like the first 28 people who responded. We just kind of set you up to come. And one of the folks that was there was Alexis Ohanian, and Alexis Ohanian is one of the founders of Reddit. And one of the people was there was Sewell Chan, and Sewell Chan is the deputy opinion page editor for the New York Times. Angie Holland was there. She is on the staff of PolitiFact. LaToya Peterson was there, and she is now a John S. Knight Fellow at Stanford. And, this is literally just convening a group of people in a room to talk about the future of journalism. And, looking at kind of where we were then to kind of some of the things that we're doing now, we would not have had the opportunity, many of us, especially those of us who came from a citizen journalism kind of background at that time, to even do what we're doing now, had it not been for the technology. So the technology offered an opportunity for sure in 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009. The tide is kind of changing a little bit on that in technology, and this is where I think we agree, is that the technology is even more so where we had an opportunity for events like the Gina 6 in Louisiana, or the 2008 presidential election, which really embraced bloggers. Now, now that everybody's blogging, now that everybody has a Tumblr account and an Instagram and a Twitter, it's not novel anymore to have people like me kind of speak. And so we are getting even more siloed. And the algorithms are reinforcing our beliefs and our thoughts. Google and Facebook. Facebook knows the political leanings of my friends. Facebook knows what my friends do for a living. And so when Facebook feeds me so-called what I think some people think is random news in your news feed, it's all for a reason. They're giving you articles and suggestions on things that they think that you'll click on so that they can get advertising dollars. And so it is definitely reinforcing. The technology and the algorithms are definitely reinforcing the things that we believe. And so that is a question. But I think it will come back to, all the discussions come down to business model. And we do have a newspaper here who has tried some innovative things and has not been afraid to throw things on the wall to see what stick. But I still think that we have a lot of work to do as it relates to our end user, which is the people and the public, and how do we serve them? And a lot of the stories that are really journalists and journalism folks could help solve are not what shareholders want to see people doing stories on, and are not popular stories, and not easy stories. And they may not get the most clicks, but they are the stories that are going to change our world the most. And so I do see this as overall as an opportunity. And having watched, and the reason I started my blog, again, was because I wanted to disrupt the industry just however much one person could. It's kind of like when I thought my one-person boycott of Walmart might make changes. It's probably not so much. But that is what I wanted to do, and that is why I entered the arena as a media critic, but as someone who said I couldn't just criticize, try to come out and be helpful. And the practice of journalism is hard, it's important, and if I didn't think it was important, I wouldn't be part of the National Advisory Board for the Poynter Institute of Media Studies. I think the work that journalists do is of great importance. And I just always think about going back to the values that are most important, the values that will sustain the industry, realizing the need for a strong business model, and most of all, representing diverse points of view.
Shawn, thank you. And you touched on this a little bit, but if you don't mind going just one step deeper, and that is, do you feel that journalism is in fact living up to its ethical responsibilities and applying and holding true to the values it's supposed to by mandate?
Well, I mean, journalism has a number of values, and I think the question becomes, which values do we hold highest? Which values are most important, right? I mean, accuracy. Where do we weigh accuracy? Is accuracy as important today as it was before? Am I willing to go out on sources now earlier than I was before because TMZ might have the story before? I mean, that's one, the whole breaking news notion. I remember when Michael Jackson died, and, most people the day Michael Jackson died, most people found out that he died first from TMZ. They broke the story, is what people say. And I was listening to the radio, and I heard it on a ticket. But when I got home, I went to CNN. I went to a mainstream source to just hear it played out, and CNN was not willing to say until they had all their sources correct. For me, I think that is holding to your values without succumbing to the pressure of the business cycle of breaking news, because at the end of the day, to me, this is as a citizen, as a consumer, it's about being right and who you feel the most trust in. And, that's not to say that I don't trust TMZ, because I do. And if I really want to know, the immediacy of something that happens, I may go to the TMZ Twitter feed. I believe quite a bit in what they do, but when it comes to breaking down, TMZ is not going to tell me why this is important. TMZ is not going to tell me how this might change the way that I live my life. That's a different value. And so I think that sometimes journalism is chasing the wrong values in the wrong way because they don't realize what they have. Journalism doesn't realize what it has and why people come to them for that.
And I have one last question. We may get a few more in before the evening's over. But now that you're on the media side in the public sector, what have been some of the big surprises for you?
That is a good question. I think probably the biggest surprise for me is that, when I went and kind of onto the journalism side, and I never really worked on a mainstream news organization, but I had a lot of interactions there. And, I was always really fascinated by how hard people worked and how seriously people took their craft. I don't know why. I was in pharmaceutical sales before I got into all this, so people work hard there too. But really on the public side, I think there's this misperception by a lot of people, and I talked to someone else who just made a transition as well, and just how hard and how serious people take their job on the public side. And it's, the same can be said for journalism, but the pay is not always the greatest, but people really are into it for the public's sake. And the other thing is just I think the biggest thing is how much both sides, on the public side and the journalism media side, how little they really understand what the other people do. I think, on the journalism side, they really don't understand what the day-to-day life is on the inside of a big organization, a big government organization trying to get it done. And on the other side, I think that people who've been in government don't really understand the values of journalism, why what they do is important, and why it's important that we have a media who will hold public officials accountable. So that's probably been the biggest surprises.
Which is one of our main goals, or at least it used to be, and some of that is slippery sliding, right?
Absolutely.
Thanks. Well, we'll come back to you. Chip, one of the things that really intrigued me, I mean, how could it not? It's the last sentence in your introduction that Oprah said, free speech not only lives, it rocks. So a twofold question, if I may. First, what is free speech really, as it relates and ties into the First Amendment? And the other, because some of the work that you're so very much involved in, and that is that a lot of people have been critical of the United States Supreme Court decision in Citizens United. We'd like your view on that, because it all kind of ties together.
Free speech in our country means that almost without exception, all of us are allowed to speak without government interference. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, and it is a prohibition against the government suppressing what we say. And in that regard, Citizens United was an absolutely correct, mainstream First Amendment decision. You all remember that President Obama was critical of it in his State of the Union speech a few months after the case had been decided. He roundly criticized it, and I don't know if you were watching, but you may recall Justice Alito visibly reacting to the president's criticism of that decision. And yet, the media that should be advocates championing this decision have more or less been critical of it. The New York Times editorially said the decision was disastrous, it was terrible, it was reckless. And why has there been this reaction? The facts of the case are an absolutely mainstream First Amendment decision. There was a company, Citizens United, $12 million a year budget, that made a movie called Hillary, the Movie. And it was 90 minutes. I've never seen it, but I'm told it's not very well done. But nevertheless, it's a movie entitled to First Amendment protection. And the Citizens United wanted to show this movie within 30 days of an election, that being Hillary Clinton's primary run against, of all people, Barack Obama in 2008. And yet, a federal statute prohibited the showing of that movie because it was made by a corporation and it was advocating the defeat of a candidate. And the statute not only prohibited, in other words, restrained prior to publication this movie, but if Citizens United had violated this law, they were subject to criminal penalties. Now, that is a classic prior restraint. There was a feature of the law that allowed them to go ahead and get pre-clearance, but as the court said, that really didn't take it out of the realm of prior restraints. And the suggestion that this is even a close call under First Amendment jurisprudence, to me, was odd indeed, and yet the decision was 5-4, and they had to expressly overrule a prior decision of the United States Supreme Court that said that corporations did not have the same free speech rights as individuals. And some people who have criticized Citizens United have tried to latch on to that thought to say that corporations really shouldn't have free speech rights. That is absurd. If you look at the jurisprudence of the First Amendment in the United States Supreme Court over 100 years. You'll see cases like New York Times Company versus Sullivan, Robert Welch Inc. Versus Gertz, Bellotti, all sorts of cases where corporations like Belo Corporation and WFAA TV and KDFW TV and the Fort Star Telegram Inc., they all have First Amendment rights, and it's absurd to suggest that because you are speaking in a corporate forum, you don't have the rights to free speech or free press guaranteed by the Constitution. So the decision, in my view, was totally correct. And I have wondered why the press and people on the more liberal side of the political spectrum have criticized it. And I think it is because there is a great hunger and thirst in this country for campaign finance reform. And I think most people feel that our campaign finance system is out of control and needs reform, needs to be changed. You can accept that premise, but if you do so at the cost of First Amendment rights, that is trampling on people's right to speak freely, particularly about an election, political speech, which is at the highest level of free speech in our country. It seems you are doing a disservice to our long tradition of First Amendment freedoms. So I do not stand with my friends in the media who criticize that decision, nor do I stand with people that I more often than not agree with on the liberal side of the political spectrum, who believe that the end of campaign finance reform is justified to suppress free speech. One other footnote to this, another terribly dangerous, in my judgment, argument for the First Amendment was expressed by Justice Breyer in a recent argument in another campaign finance case called McCuistion versus the Federal Election Commission. In that's a case that involves aggregate limits. In other words, a contributor is only permitted per election cycle to, in the aggregate, contribute, I don't know, $123,000 or something. And McCuistion, a wealthy businessman from Alabama, wants to contribute more. He's willing to stand by the limit per candidate, what's called the base limit, but he says, I can contribute the base limit to 12 candidates, but I want to contribute to 18 candidates. And so he's challenging that provision of the election law, the federal election law. Justice Breyer at the argument said, isn't it a First Amendment positive that the law suppresses the speech of wealthy people like McCuistion who want to spend more on our electoral process, because that will make poorer people who don't have as much money to spend feel better about themselves. Their voice will be better heard if not drowned out by all these rich people contributing all that money. It is a shocking thought under the First Amendment, because the First Amendment is a prohibition on government action. Congress shall make no law. It is not a mandate to level the playing field so that everybody's voice is equal. And think about the practicalities of that. How could Congress level the playing field so that all of our voices are in equal modulation and equal force? It is undoable and certainly unconstitutional under all of the jurisprudence of the First Amendment.
We'll come back to it and take a vote, maybe. Let's see. Well, one of your peers on this panel is an expert in the First Amendment and free speech. And Rita, you're the director of the McGuire Institute, the Ethics Center, at SMU. So obviously and clearly you advocate for ethical standards, think they should be taught, and yet you question whether it's the role of the press to apply ethical standards to news events. That had me very curious. So can you please help us draw that distinction and explain why it's important and why you feel that way?
It is. I certainly think that the media should make an effort, every journalist, every person in the public trust should make an effort to be honest and accurate in their reporting. So it's not that I'm encouraging people to lie or to fabricate, but journalists traditionally cover news as it happens. So if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., and you go into the Museum of News that's called the Newseum, they have a whole section there about the coverage of 9/11. So you were watching it as the event unfolds, when there's chaos on the streets and nobody's really sure which way to turn. It is the living recording of that moment. But that's not the time, when you are in that moment, to start making standards of who's right, who's wrong. We remember when the bombings took place in Oklahoma City, there was suddenly this Muslim roundup, right? It had to be another Muslim attack, and it was ridiculous. It turned out, of course, to be, an Anglo guy from the Midwest. But when we start making those ethical judgments in the moment that we're covering something, I think we make tragic decisions sometimes about what happens to people. So one of the things is I don't think that journalists' proper role is to be the arbiter of the truth. I think the proper role, rather, is to say, here is the wide range of stories and perspectives, and that it's up to us as citizens to figure out which one has the most fidelity. And some of that, as George Bush talks about at his new library opening, we won't really know where the weight of history falls until probably long after most of us are dead, when we sort through whether a decision was right or wrong. All we know is what they hoped would be accomplished at any particular moment in time.
One of the other things that you mentioned you have very strong feelings about, and I know that I'm certainly curious about this one, is in your research, which is very extensive on this, you've discussed the distinctions between news talk and reporting, and we've all alluded to this. How are those distinct ideas, and what does that distinction tell us about how we as press function? And why is it important?
Well, the news talk phenomenon really started with Fox News. You may recall that they were the first ones to really make a cottage industry out of news talk. And to Carolyn's point, it was an economic model. You didn't have to have a lot of reporters. Instead, what I get is some pretty smart people with pretty well-informed opinions of the world, but they take anything that comes off the press and we talk about it, and we talk about it, and then we talk about it. It doesn't require any journalistic excellence, and there's certainly nothing original. And in fact, the biggest problem with that style of news brand is that sometimes the very thing you're talking about turns out to be wrong. Media accuracy studies of news talk radio and news talk television generally finds news talk has the highest rate of error of any type of reporting. So I think it's one of those things we have to be really careful about. It's not that the individuals who are talking about it are necessarily wrong, but what they're talking about, the mere factual substance, is wrong. Now, a number of you in this room are lawyers, and I don't think I need to convince you how easy it is for somebody to take an isolated piece of information from a case and extrapolate that as being the deciding factor upon which a case should be won or lost. You are very aware of how fast information can get out of the gate and how quickly it can be wrong. So I think it's one of those issues when we start talking about news talk. So Fox really perfected the notion of talk radio. It became a great economic model for making money, and it attracts a lot of viewers. CNN, who, as just a matter of disclosure, I work for, went down the road of trying to emulate Fox, and it tried to be Fox Light. Well, they didn't do a very good job of that because it's not what they do. They have now gotten new leadership, And they are returning back to the model that they had previously, which is putting more boots on ground and trying to get into being being the people that you want to go to on a breaking story. It's called the CNN effect. As a matter of fact, that we go to lots of other sources for news and news entertainment. But if there's a breaking story, by and large, people will go to CNN to see what's actually happening.
And it's amazing how often we keep saying on the news that this is breaking news, and I'd like to come back to that, but I'm sure that there are folks out here who have burning questions, do you not? Now, surely they didn't answer everything in the world for you. So what I'm going to do is come on over to you so we can get this on camera. Okay.
I just, whoa. I'm curious, you said the role of journalism is to present breaking news and not follow truth, but what about the role of the investigative reporter and watchdog journalism? I mean, if that goes away, and I remember when Jim Maroney spoke to us recently, he said, when he spoke at a panel, one of the reporters there said, if you take away all these reporters who are covering the agencies, it's a field day for politicians, and what about the role of journalism to do that?
Good question, thank you, Debbie. Who'd care to address that? Any and all?
I'll take it first, but I bet Carolyn has some comments to make about that. I couldn't agree with you more that really good investigative journalism is important. What I disagree with, and I think to Shawn's point, Shawn was representing a point of view that nobody else was covering out there. And in many ways, it's bloggers that are now the people that are first on the scene, that have eyes. You know, when we have anything that happens at an airport or, unfortunately, a shooting or something, it's often the people with their iPhones that are sending us the first reports of what's going on. And those are not always completely accurate, but sometimes bloggers can get to a lot of places where other people can't. And they're the first-hand witnesses to it before the news folks can get there. The truth is we just don't have an economic model that can get reporters there. But there are some places, like the Center for Public Integrity, where they spend lots of money as a nonprofit doing nothing but investigative reporting, and it can take anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 years on stories. So I think there are different models for that.
Anyone else care to add to that? Please, jump in.
Well, Niki, you said that you believed everything you read.
As a little girl, I did. That was a long time ago.
Well, and that's my point. That's my point. People of a certain age grew up pretty much believing what they read in the newspaper or saw on television. But that's not reality today. My firm, Jackson Walker, along with a very fine jury consulting firm here, Bloom Strategic Consultants, actually did 2 studies of jurors who had been qualified as jurors and were sitting with nothing to do down at the Dallas County Courthouse. Two separate surveys, 100 people each time. And we surveyed their view about blogging and bloggers and what sort of legal responsibility that bloggers had for things that they wrote. And Shawn, good news for you, not much legal responsibility no matter what you say. And the trend that we saw 3 years ago only increased over the 3-year period among the people we surveyed. And there was a phenomenon that they don't believe everything they read, but there is so much to read, they feel they can get to a truth from the multiplicity of voices that are out there. And that's a hugely different model than what we grew up with. And the internet's made that possible. And people under 30 for sure, and maybe people under 35 have a completely different attitude about things than those of us on the panel, perhaps with the exception of Shawn, who appears to be younger than some of us.
I bet he doesn't believe everything he reads, right, Shawn?
You know, the crowd, if we talk about crowdsourcing, I mean, the crowd can be really, really smart, and sometimes they're not that smart. But I mean, I think that we tend to we don't give enough credit to the audience. The audience is really good about determining the truth and what's right and what's wrong. And if what we call a blogger, which bloggers sit at the desk of all major news organizations these days, but if what we call a blogger in any form puts out an erroneous or inaccurate piece of information, the crowd is pretty good about figuring that out and going and getting to the truth. And we've seen that in a number of occasions. And so I do think that the speed to get to the news, the speed to report, which is more a function of the technology, does lead to some errors, which has always happened. I mean, newspapers have always had the next day to come back and do retractions. They get names wrong, they get facts wrong sometimes and come back and say, our bad, we did it. And that's still just part of it. But I think the crowd, we just don't give our consumer enough credit to kind of dig through what's right and what's wrong and what's truth and not truth.
Another question here from Kurt.
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Babcock. I agree with him.
Work with this guy. Well, this is a loaded question.
No, it's not. I agree with him on the basic outcome of the Citizens United decision, but I have a problem with the way you characterize, I guess, the basic issue involved, which you seem to say it's an issue of corporate or wealthy people being prevented from speaking. But in fact, the kind of the philosophical groundwork, if you go back to Justice Kennedy's decision, is money equals speech. And I'm not sure that money equals speech more than money equals anything else. It seems to me that there needs to be a more, if for want of a better word, a more rational explanation for it, because it simply isn't the fact that rich people are prevented from going out in the public square, by campaign finance laws. They can go out and scream as much as poor people. The question is, why is it that money equals speech?
Well, thank you, Karl Marx, for that diatribe. But it wasn't money in Citizens United. It is in the McCuistion case. But in Citizens United, it wasn't money. It was a movie. It takes money to produce a movie. But the movie was speech. There's no question about that. Just as a documentary would be, or a newspaper article, or a magazine article, and the law made it illegal to publish that movie. So it wasn't about money being speech. It was about a law prohibiting the distribution of a movie within 30 days of an election when the movie contained political speech saying that Hillary Clinton shouldn't be president. So there.
Dave, lighten it up for us.
Well, I don't know if this is going to lighten anything up, but first of all, thank you for this presentations. This is kind of a philosophical question, and I hope I can make this as succinct as possible. It seems like the reason we're here tonight is to talk about values in journalism, ethical responsibilities. And just as a point of disclosure, I work in Catholic radio. And in Catholic radio, the hosts in Catholic radio, we basically say that we're not giving opinions because we think there's an objective truth that transcends, our opinions. And so we basically are just following the teachings of a transcendent truth that we believe. Ms. Barta started off talking about the echo chamber of people's own belief, the partisan divide, and this and that. Dr. King mentioned that journalists are not to be the arbiters of truth. Mr. Williams just mentioned that in many times audiences determine the truth. The right and the wrong can be determined by the audience. So I guess my question is if we are trying to find some kind of standard of journalism, some kind of ethical responsibility, some kind of value, does that not require some kind of baseline? It seems like nowadays there are fewer and fewer things that we agree on when it comes to abortion or marriage, Miley Cyrus's dance. I mean, like, you get all these opinions. There's no objective truth. And so how can we even begin a discussion about values when there doesn't seem to be any kind of consensus, like I think there used to be if you went back 40 or 50 years ago, about what's right or wrong. The only thing we seem to agree on that's wrong is if somebody walks into a grocery store and mows down people, and then everybody says, yeah, that's wrong. But when it comes to marriage issues, abortion, even infidelity in politicians, things like that, it's kind of a grab bag. So I hope that makes sense. What would y'all say about that?
Whomever'd like to take it.
You took
Carolyn.
mic from her.
I think the values you're raising have to do with ideological values that people might have. I think that the values that we're talking about in terms of the media and the press are basic values of report the truth and report the truth honestly as you see it, do no harm, and there's a whole list of values that are that you could find in the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. Most of them are the values that we agreed upon years and years ago. SPJ is now looking at its code to see how do we revise this to take into account the new media, the proliferation of media, of internet sites and blogs. What sort of values should we have now? So I think it's very much in flux, but I think the values that you're talking about, it seems to be how you see the value as opposed to how somebody else sees the value of a political issue. I think that the trend is, or the way that journalism has gone is that journalists don't try to determine anymore what's right or wrong, and so and that's a problem too, because what we have a lot is we've just got analysts who talk from one side and others who talk from the other side, and nobody knows which side is right. And so it's a he said or a she said, and there is no determinant there. I don't know how you deal with that. How do we get what is really the truth? It's beyond comprehension. So somebody else.
Well, I know since we're talking about political speech in particular, one of the things that I think we should be really thoughtful of is whose speech is it that we're trying to assess in terms of this truth standard. A recent poll was done, one of the largest polls of young Americans, and I thought it was really instructive, particularly to members of religious institutions, who said, look, we really want to go to our churches and our synagogues and our mosques because we want to think about higher things, about who we want to be as people. But we don't want those same institutions in our politics. And I think, and I'm not a Catholic, but I love this Pope, because I think that's the message that he's been saying over and over again. We've got some fundamental things to do here, and we get fixated on issues that distract us from how we come together, how we build a better world and society. And yes, those other value issues are important, and we should address them one-on-one, in our circles, our groups of friends, and our families. But I think we make a mistake if we say that there is a truth and it's there universally for everybody, and those that don't accept it are problematic to us.
I seem to recall, and this is going way back in history, that journalism had a reputation for not being as truthful, honest, and ethical. And there was a tremendous amount of bias in the media. Now, journalists, like attorneys, we're people. And yes, there may be a certain set of ethical standards and values that we have. However, is it not healthy nowadays with the proliferation of so much media in so many different ways? And Shawn, I think you mentioned this, I could be wrong, in that there is so much that what we can do if we're discerning and read enough. I mean, I have like 16 or 17 news apps, newspapers from all over the world and YouTubes and everything else on my iPhone. So if I take the time and I'm careful, and hopefully I can find some kind of balance,
Yes?
Yeah, I think you raise a couple really interesting points. Number one, if you really go back to the history of journalism, especially in this country, when Ben Franklin was printing out paper, the Poor Man's Almanac and all this stuff, I mean, the newspapers were trying to get candidates elected. I mean, that was the newspapers. That was kind of what they did. I mean, and they were, none of them hardly ever had an ounce of truth in them. I mean, if you go back to where journalism started, and so it got better and better and better, and you know, more about truth. And so it's kind of been an evolution. But if we can't fool ourselves and think that journalism was ever this, you know, this perfect ideal. And I guess that's kind of one thing that kind of frustrates me. One of the things that, especially having done so much work with SMU's journalism department, one of the things I've been encouraged by is that students today, whether they're journalists or not, the sources that they use for news are much more diverse than things that we ever used. I mean, many of us, if you ask us what went on, we had one or two, maybe three sources that we could go to. But today, students in colleges, you know, they are on BBC, they're on New York Times, they're on The Root, they're on Griot. I mean, they have a number of sources, and so again, these are things that I think are positive, even though I do think that we do get caught up in these echo chambers. You know, for many people like me, you know, the first place you go, you know, is Google or Twitter. When I, you know, first got the information about the shooting at LAX, the first thing that I do is go to Twitter, and I look and see what the trending topic is associated with it. I knew it was LAX. And I click on that. Of course, so much of that is it's basically an aggregation of the stories that the LA Times is doing and other news sources in the area. But this technology does allow us a place to get these different sources. And so I do think that has been another advantage, is the number of sources that have been brought to the table.
Thank you, Shawn. We have a question from Emily.
Yes, I started as a print journalist back in the mid-1980s. With Gannett. They were wonderful. I'm a double minority, so they were always very encouraging. Like a lot of journalists, I got an MBA and I went into the business sector. I can understand as a passionate journalist how they missed the whole business aspect once it went electronic and didn't start charging for content, and now they're having to kind of backtrack and charging people for something that they gave them for free for such a long time. So I guess my question to you is, how do you keep talented people working within the news media when revenues keep going down and the talent, the minority talent is really coveted in other fields?
Good question, because there are lots of very talented people up here who are no longer in the newsroom. And we'll have time for two more questions, and that'll be it. Thanks.
I'll just make it brief. It's hard to keep talented people today, but the reason that the talented people stay with journalism is because they see it as a calling. It's not a job. They're called to it, they're passionate about it, and so they do it. But I will tell you that we're seeing fewer young people want to go into the field, and particularly males. Our classes at SMU are almost entirely female. Males don't want to go into it, at least not at our school. But I think that's generally speaking, they're going to business school. They're going where they can make some money. So.
Anyone else care to address that? All right, question from Christine.
Hi, I can't really see any of you, but I'm a former student of Carolyn Barta. I am wondering what you guys tell students these days. You guys are talking about all the problems with journalism, everything we need to fix. So, I mean, what is the point? What do you tell your students? What is the point of journalism, and how do you motivate them to go into the industry?
Thank you.
Let me take the first part of that, because I watch Carolyn Barta with her classes. I'm privileged to take a group of students to Washington, D.C. every year, and Carolyn and I have gone up there a number of years together. So I get a great opportunity to observe what she says and does. But I think there's some really interesting facts at the bottom of that. People go into journalism in part because they really want to make a difference. And they want to make a difference because they're curious. When things don't add up, when Citizens United is going up again with the Hillary movie. They're asking the questions that nobody else seems to want to answer. And as soon as the good question is asked, the rest of us are like, well, yeah, I didn't thought about that. I want to know that too. So they're asking, the right questions, and they're curious. But I think the other part is because they want information and because that's so important, they learn how to aggregate ideas and from disparate areas of their lives and put it together in a story form that makes sense to us. Because we're all storytelling human beings. That's how we learn at our mother's knee, is that we learn the lessons of life through storytelling. Good journalists are good storytellers, and they tell us who are the players involved and what are the issues and what drives these people at great sacrifice often to themselves. They tell us the courtroom drama. So they want to be the storytellers. A part of it is they're historians. They want to record for all time what it's like. And some of our great movies that we've had recently have been terrific at giving us an insight into what the time is like. But journalists write that daily story. So if you really want to know what it felt like in the Great Fire, go to the newspapers. You're going to get better reports of a sense of what it's like. And I think there's that great vision that a number of journalists have for that.
My daughter is a news producer for KTRK, which is the ABC-owned and operated station in Houston, and she's been there 6 or 7 years, I think, right out of college, and she finds the job exhilarating because she gets paid to basically read what's going on in the world and then distill that down into news stories that are read over television. Now, it's frustrating to her that she's got to write in short sentences that can be comprehended by 8th graders, but notwithstanding that, it's a great job for her, and she finds intellectually stimulating. And I think, to follow up with what Carolyn said, there are many people where the news and journalism is just in their DNA. They're born into it, and hopefully we're always going to have people like that in this country. I don't see any sign of it abating right now.
Well, I would just say very quickly about that. I've always looked at it as being in the graduate school of life. You're just learning something new every day. It's an opportunity for some people to have their work be what they love and what they enjoy doing. So you're a sports writer, you're covering sports. They're involved with sports every day. That's what they want to be doing. And beyond that, it's just fun.
I have to jump in really quickly. One of the members from my office at DPD, Mr. Tom Kuhn, is here, and he brought his daughter, who just graduated with a journalism degree from University of Texas, right? And she's done some great internships, and she's going to go out and work, the way up the journalists do. But, for me, in the office that I'm in now, I would love to hire someone with the skills that she has in my office. And I think one of the things that's just a fact is that the skills that journalism students are learning today are valued in many industries. And there are many companies, and these comments are not related to how that fits in with the ethics of what's being taught and how that fits in with journalists going to work for big businesses. But I mean, backpack journalism, folks who can write a good story and then also go out and shoot the video, go edit that video on Final Cut Pro and post it to YouTube. There are companies throughout this country who are looking for those skills. And so, that's just another side of it. Even though the newspaper jobs and media jobs may be dwindling, the skills that are being taught in journalism classes are valued throughout the industry.
Thank you. And with us is Jimmy Lovell, who is a very distinguished journalist, now retired, and a Press Club of Dallas living legend. Question, Jimmy?
The only question I have is how soon we get out. Not actually. I have a small thing to discuss. When I'm invited to a group meeting, I feel left out when I don't get to speak up a little bit. I sound like it because I'm country, as you can tell. But my first job was on a country newspaper in Del Rio, Texas. And it was back before you had the implements that you have today to put the news before the people. They had to write the stories. They had to then try to get the people to do something to read them. And so they would invent a place to put people to make them want to read the paper. And they did it in a very good style because I survived, and I think I prospered reasonably well from doing that. I've worked on several newspapers, and all of them have been good. They've been fun. But the one thing they didn't do was ensure your job, you know, very well. And I've always wondered what in the heck would happen if somebody stood up and said, hey, I want to run a newspaper, but I'd like to tell people how good it is. And that's damned hard to do, I'll tell you, sometimes. So if you ever get hung up on what to say, just say, I come from a long line of newspaper people.
And I'm his wife. And I was in the art department, which nobody has even mentioned the newspaper advertising. I did ads on a Fairchild. Now, I bet none of you have ever heard of a Fairchild. It was a mat maker back in the 1952, okay? And we did ads. Now, all I want to know now is what will become of people who like to read newspapers again. And we can't, because the type is not dark enough. And I love to pick up my newspaper, look at the ads, read the items, and I can't. Now, that's not fair. So the Star-Telegram is having a plant in Plano. Why can't we have a printing plant that makes the Dallas Morning News a little darker? I don't mind paying a little extra for that privilege, but it would be lovely for us old people to be able to read the newspaper again.
And that would solve the economic problem, right? Anyone care to address that? And I'm going to take one last question. Then we'll be out of here, Jimmy.
Okay, hi. My question has to do with those of you on the panel. You've talked a lot about the future of journalism and journalism students. And as I look at the curricula at different colleges and universities, I'm often surprised by what they're teaching the future journalists. So I'd like to hear from each of you, what would be your top 3 or 4 things that you think colleges and universities should be teaching future journalists, and not just from the people who are from SMU, but also those in business and other industries. What do you think the future journalist needs to know?
Writing, free speech and First Amendment research.
Yeah, I agree about writing, but I don't think much else matters. I didn't go to a school where there was any journalism courses at all, and never took a journalism course before working for a newspaper, but I think a school that has a liberal arts education and you take whatever you take and hopefully have a good mind and a fine mind and go into the business.
I think video skills are important. I think business. I think there needs to be more business integrated into it. I don't necessarily know that there'll be as many entrepreneurial journalists. I mean, not just because I wasn't great at it, isn't the only reason I'm saying that. But I think business is good, and writing is always going to be important, and I think everybody's doing that now. But I don't think right now you could undervalue the being able to edit video.
So ethics, the first course that our students take is an ethics course in convergence journalism. Beyond that, written and oral communication and digital journalism, how to use, how to put it all up on the web.
Thank you. We promised you some strong voices. I think you got that, didn't you? Please, a round of applause for them. Thank you. And I'd like to say thank you to the Dallas Bar Association Media Relations Committee. Thank you very much, Tom. And one of your cohorts was somewhere, I thought. Also want to remind you that the Press Club of Dallas is having a remembrance of JFK with about 15, 17 of the journalists still alive reporting what happened, and go onto the Press Club of Dallas website and you're invited to come. We are going to put this video that we taped this evening on the Press Club site, so you'll have the link and you can share it and of course tweet and blog and do it all. Thanks for being here. Hopefully you enjoyed this and you'd like to see more of them. Appreciate you.